Hello, welcome to PG Pathshala. This is Dr. Subhradeep Karmakar. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Biochemistry at All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So, today we are going to talk about and we are going to learn about blotting techniques. And you are going to see that what are the different types of blotting techniques and what are their applications in biology. So, what is blotting? So, blots are actually the techniques of transferring DNA, RNA and proteins into carriers so that they can be separated, and often allows the use of a gel electrophoresis to achieve this one. Now, blotting techniques or blots are actually a general term. So, there are different types of blotting techniques depending upon what kind of molecules you are actually been trying to blot. So, it is an if it is a DNA molecule, then you call it as a southern blot. If it is an RNA molecule, you call it as a northern blot, and if it is in proteins, then you call it as a western blot. And of course, we are going to see that there are different variants of this kind of blotting techniques. So, in general, just try to understand that blotting techniques has to do anything where you are going to take a protein or a DNA or an RNA depending upon what kind of blot it is, and then transfer it to a membrane kind of a stuff, which is either in PVDF membrane or in nitrocellulose membrane. And then we are going to first we are going to run an electrophoresis actually before that, and then after the electrophoresis has been done, you are going to transfer them into a PVDF or a nylon kind of membrane, and then you are going to probe it using the different probes to find out what is the molecule of our interest. So, that is a general term, and we are going to talk about each one of them separately. So, as I mentioned, like there are three main types of blots, and again just remember, this is not the complete list. The list is even larger than that, because there are different variants of this one. So, the southern blot has to do with the detection of the DNA, the northern blot has to do with the detection of the RNA, and the western blot, which is most widely applicable these days in almost every lab in biology and biochemistry and molecular biology actually uses western blot. So, that is a starting point, and then you are going to ask different questions, but this western blot is going to be a fundamental junction point from where so many different techniques actually emerges. So, these are the three main types of blots, and there are different variants of blots. Variants can be logically derived from the fact, suppose we have an protein that actually binds to the DNA. So, it is a DNA binding protein. Now, DNA is been probed or been interrogated by southern blot, and then proteins has to be interrogated with the help of western blot, and therefore, if you mix these two together, then it becomes a southwestern blot, and therefore, logically it stands for identifying the proteins that actually binds to the DNA. And then you have the northwestern blots where you are trying to identify the proteins that binds to RNA. So, it is an RNA binding proteins. So, that is known as the northwestern blot. So, you are going to see those variants of the different types of blots. So, primarily these are the main three types of blots. So, aim and objective of this particular module is to basic understanding of the basic concepts of blotting techniques, like southern, western, northern, and to explore the advantages of each of these, the applications of each of these, when you are going to use them, what is the experimental workflow from them, what are the different techniques and when you are going to use these techniques, and also we are going to talk a little bit about the advantages, disadvantages, the lacunae, the limitations when you cannot use this blot, or how much of the information you can actually get out of this blot. So, we are going to talk about all of these, and you are going to go through each of these actually very carefully. So, this is the broad experimental overview that you have a protein, you have a DNA or you have an RNA, and then the first step in all this kind of blotting techniques is that we need to run them through a gel, and that is known as the gel electrophoresis. So, in this gel electrophoresis, what happens is that you take that molecule of interest, DNA, RNA or protein, and then load it on an acrylamide gel. And we know for sure that that is a basic fundamental concept, that if you take a molecule and load it on the gel and then pass an electric current immersed into an, and if the gel has been submerged into a buffer, then because of the transfer of the electricity, the molecules actually moves. So, the negatively charged molecules moves towards the positive side of the electrons, and the positively charged molecules moves in the opposite directions. Like majority of these biomolecules are all negative in charge. DNA is negative charge because there is a phosphate backbone. The proteins are also negative in charge because majority of the amino acids actually negative charged with the help of coating them with SDS. So, all of these DNAs and the proteins and the RNAs are preferably negative charge, and when you run it through a medium where there is an electrical potential, then they are going to move preferentially in the direction of positive electrons. Now, the whole purpose of running through an electrophoresis is that we need to separate out, we need to resolve out. See, if you take suppose a 20 microliters, or having suppose 20 micrograms of proteins, suppose you take a cell, you grow them, lyse the cells, get the cell lysate, and measure the concentration of it. Suppose the concentration is 1 micrograms per microliter. Suppose you load 20 microliter of it in each of the gels. So, it is about 20 micrograms you are loading. Just try to imagine that 20 microliter of that particular soup of the cell having all the different proteins, the entire proteome is actually represented within that particular small 20 microliters. Now, if you just take that one and start doing anything, you are not going to get any good conclusive results, because every protein is being jumbled up together into one small point of singularity kind of thing, right. So, what we need to do is that we need to take those proteins and individually try to resolve them, separate them, so that we can see the resolution of them, we can piece them together, and then we can separate them out, so that we can look into each of these individually. And that is a fantastic technique which has been discovered quite so many years back, where we take the proteins or the molecules of the DNA or RNA and then run them through the gel, and this process is known as electrophoresis. So, that is the first prerequisites of any blotting techniques. So, you do an electrophoresis, you get resolved of the molecules into the different criteria, the sizes, the molecular masses, the charge, and so forth. And after that is done, then you are going to employ the different blotting techniques. We are going to work through that process again, as we are going to individually discuss them. So, brief introductions, pretty much what I was talking about, that the transfer of the molecules like nucleic acids to proteins into a solid surface, and that is what is known as the blotting. Now, the fragments of the DNA and RNA molecules are separated by gel electrophoresis, and then it is transferred to a nylon or a PVDF membrane, and then depending upon what kind of molecules are transferring, it is either southern blot, western blot, or northern blot. And we had also discussed about the applications of each one of them, very brief, but we are going to go into more detail of them in our subsequent slides. Okay, coming back to the southern blot, it has actually been discovered by Edwin Southern back in 1975, and this is the technique where he has postulated and he has used it for finding out the DNA. So, what happened is that if you want to have any information about the DNA, this is the technique of use, or this is the process, or this is the method by which you actually do it. Now, remember that once Edwin Southern actually discovered this technique in 1975, people found that and asked that, okay, if DNA can be done, very similar molecule like RNA, why it cannot be done? So, they did the same thing, electrophoresis, and then transfer it into a membrane, and then try to probe it with a complementary sequence which is actually level, and then find out the region of our interest, and they found that it is also working for RNA, and then people did it with antibodies using proteins, and they found that it also works for proteins. So, the name has to be, so in order to keep some kind of a pattern within the name, so even because this Edwin Southern has actually discovered it in 1975, so people has actually used it just to keep an analogy with this name. So, southern blots for DNA, so northern blots for protein for the RNA, the western blot is for proteins. So, all of these names is just because of the reason that Edwin Southern has actually discovered it first about for the DNA. So, to keep some kind of a similarity in the name, they actually named similar kind of things like northern and then westerns, just for the different directions of it. In a way, it is a little philosophical, because with the help of the different techniques, the southern blots going in the southern directions, northern one going in the northern directions, and the western going in the western directions. It's something like we are actually probing all the 4 dimensions, or in other words, we are actually probing all the 4 directions. And in a way, if you are doing all those blots, you are actually trying to find out the whole lot of information about the DNA, about the RNA, or about the protein. So, that is the whole informations contained within a cell, be it nucleic acids, be it proteins, can be done with the help of this whole blot. So, that is just to keep an harmony and similarity with the discovery of Edwin Southern back in 1975. So, Professor Sir Southern, Edwin Southern, so he is a professor of biochemistry and a fellow at Trinity College. So, in 1975, as I mentioned, that he actually discovered this southern blot. Before that, actually people were aware of that they need to find out some information of the DNA, because even if you know the DNA is a genetic material, if there is a mutation of the DNA, how you are going to find out the mutation, how you are going to confirm it, if there is a particular region of the DNA, how to get an information out of it. So, people are not aware of that. Now, he is the first person to technologically present in front of us and say that, look, this is the technique, and you can actually interrogate a particular region of the DNA because of the process of southern blot, and by this you can have a complementary sequence of the DNA, which you call as a probe, and then you level it, and then you hybridize it, and then eventually you can actually tell a lot about that particular region of interest. And that is a revolutionary idea at the time, and it was technologically also very revolutionary, because it gave an idea that the regions of the DNAs can now be interrogated and can now be looked into more detail with the help of his technique of Southern blot. So, Southern blot, so this is kind of working through the process. Remember, there are finer details of that. So, feel free to go and consult in standard book of biology, biochemistry, Maniatis, some kind of a techniques book to look into the detail of it. You are actually going to do the Southern blot, but then this is just an casual walkthrough through the entire process to tell you the workflow of it and exactly how people actually do it. So, the first step is actually extraction of the DNA from cells, any kind of cells, leukocytes and any other cells. And after the DNA is actually been extracted, this DNA is actually been cleaved into many fragments by certain restriction enzymes. This is pretty much a random cleavage. You are actually using any one of the restriction enzymes to chop the DNA into smaller pieces. What is the reason for that? Because if you take the whole DNA and load it in an electrophoresis gel, then it is never going to move, because it is such a high molecular weight and such a huge molecule, it is not even going to enter into the gel. It will be completely excluded out unless and until you make a super low quality, super low percentage gel like 0.001% gel, because if the gel concentration is less, this means the pores within the gel's matrix is actually very large. So, you need to use a very small port size, very large port size gel. This means a very low percentage of gel, be it an agarose gel or an acrylamide gel, to interrogate the DNA if it is complete in the full length. And then those small low percentage of the gels are very fragile and very hard to handle, and you are going to often tear them apart. So, in order to circumvent that problem, people actually took that particular DNA molecules and then cleaved them into smaller pieces. The advantage is that once you cleave them into smaller pieces, now the resolution is far more, because you can take those individual fragments of the DNA, if this has been cleaved, it is small manageable size, and load it in a gel, and then they can actually get resolved, because now the sizes are pretty much smaller. So, they can actually enter within the matrix of the gel, and only then we can actually think of them getting resolved according to the sizes. So, depending upon, the restriction enzymes are actually the enzymes that actually recognizes the particular recognition sequence, go and bind with it and then actually cleave that, right. Now, BAMH1 recognition sequence or EcoR1 restriction recognition sequence, they will be present pretty much uniformly into the human genome, but there will be sometimes that a fragment is very large, a fragment is very small, depending upon where we find these EcoR1 restriction sites. So, we will have a mixture of different fragments of different lengths when it has been actually acted by EcoR1. Now, you take this mixtured fragment, load it on electrophoresis, and then that electrophoretic gel is going to resolve it according to the different sizes, with the larger molecules migrating slower and the smaller molecules migrating faster. Now, you have a resolution, you have separations, you have a very fine separate individually the different sizes fragments are separated from each others, and now the resolution is way better. So, that is the first step, that you need to digest the large DNA molecules into smaller fragments. Now, the resulting fragments are size separated by electrophoresis, pretty much what I was talking in the previous slides, and then the fragments move as per the sizes, with the larger fragments moving slower and the smaller fragments moving faster. And the length of these fragments actually been compared with the bands of relative sizes. So, what is the molecular weight? So, we have a molecular weight marker or a ruler that actually gives that, okay, if this is the size of the fragment, its molecular weight is this. If this is the size of the fragment, this molecular weight is this. So, you have a standard marker which is actually been run side by side, and that marker pretty much tells you the size of the fragments, and using that you can actually use that as a reference point and can find out that what are the different sizes of the fragments which is actually being produced, and that is getting resolved by the process of electrophoresis after treatment of the DNA with the restriction. So, the DNA fragments are actually been first denatured. The reason for denaturation is that the next step you are going to use a probe, and if the DNA is double helical or double stranded, then the probe is never going to bind, because we can't form a triple helical DNA. So, in order to do that one, you took the two strands of the DNA and then actually separate them by denaturation of them. And then once it is denatured, it is now a single stranded DNA, and then they have been transferred into PBDF or nitrocellulose membrane. And the DNA represents the individual's entire genome, and the enzymatic digest cost contains a million of so many different fragments. And the gene of the interest is only in one of those pieces of the DNA. Suppose you are going to look for beta globin genes, or suppose you are going to look for HPRT gene, that will be present in one of those hundreds and thousands of millions of the fragments which is actually being produced, and that is actually derived from the DNA of that particular individuals. Now, we are so specific that we are going to exactly looking into that particular fragment, that of that particular gene, and then interrogate more about it. So, that is the beauty of this technique, is that we can actually go for very high resolutions, separations, as well as identification of the specific targets within an entire blot or within an entire genome size of about 3 × 10⁹ base pairs. So the DNA segments are then visualized with the help of a non-specific techniques after they are actually been resolved. And to avoid this, the last step in the southern blot uses a probe to identify the DNA, because if we just take the DNA fragment, how are you going to look what is the size of the fragments? We know for sure the size of the fragments, but what is the identity of these fragments? In order to know that, next we are going to do is that we are going to design a probe, and that probe is going to tell us, it's going to go and hybridize to that particular segment of the DNA where it is complementary, and then that hybridization is going to give us a band which is visualized, and then we can say that okay, if this probe is actually been complementary to this particular region of the DNA, that means that particular region of the DNA which has come out or which has been fished out must be complementary to our probe. Now we know for sure what will be the probe because we designed the probe, and therefore by finding out that which particular fragment of the DNA is hybridizing with our probes, we can get a whole lot of information about the nature of that particular fragment, because we know for sure of the identity of the probe and what the probe is doing. So the southern blotting combines gel electrophoresis for separations as well as the size separation of the DNA, and then transfer it on the nitrocellulose or PVDF membrane. And as I mentioned before, that hybridization is the process of forming a double-stranded DNA molecules between a single-stranded DNA probe and an 8-stranded target patient DNA. So we took the entire DNA and fragmented into smaller pieces, denatured it. Now individual fragments are single-stranded. That single-stranded fragment is going to hybridize with the probe and then form a double helical duplex. And just from the identity of the probe, we can find out the sequence or information about the particular region of the DNA that are actually bind to that of the probe, which shows that that is the particular region where our gene of interest is actually been there. So this is the protocol steps. Now we don't want to spend too much time over here because this is fairly standard. So digestion, size separations, denaturations, transfer, hybridizations with the specific probes. After it is hybridized, the next step is the detection. So you do it either in chemiluminescence detections if the molecule is chemiluminescent, or you can do an P32 leveling of the DNA probes, and then once P32 is achieved level, you can actually go and do an autoradiography and then actually detect it. So detection modalities are the different depending upon what kind of target we are actually interrogating, but at the same time just remember that these protocols are very robust and they actually works pretty much whatever the different detection techniques you actually use it. So this is the process in visualizations, or in the cartoons you could see over there that the DNA double stranded molecules are actually been transferred and then run on the electrophoresis. After that they are actually been denatured, and then once they are denatured, they are been allowed to hybridize with the probe which is complementary in the size, and then the probe has to be radio labeled with or some kind of a labeling, so that once the probe goes and hybridizes with the parental DNA, we know the identity of it from the bands which is when actually appears on the gel. So the southern blotting, basically when you do it, you kind of doing in a way that when the DNA is actually transferred is electrophoresis, and after that the next step is transferring the DNA into PVDF membrane or nitrocellulose membrane, and that particular step actually involves either an electrical force to push the DNA out of the membrane, out of the gel to the membrane, or it also involves maybe a mechanical pressure or a force or just a brutal force just to transfer the molecules in a mechanical way. So either way it is actually it is doable. So I still remember that when we used to put big books, big heavier books on the top of it, so that because of the shear pressure, DNA actually comes out of the gel and then actually moves into the nitrocellulose membrane. Remember, nitrocellulose membranes are positive in charge and the DNA is negative in charge. So this movement is facilitated by electrochemical potential. In addition to that, we are going to put a pressure of them, just a shear pressure effect, so that the DNA can be squeezed out of the gel and actually can move and bind into the nitrocellulose membrane. So this is how it looks like, and we are just going to skip the slide because this is pretty much the same what we actually been talking around. So methods of the transfer. So there is an upward capillary transfer, downward capillary transfer, simultaneous transfer to the two membranes, electrophoretic transfer and vacuum transfer. It's a very good exercise to go back and then consult your textbook and then find out what are the differences of these different techniques, or what are the similarities, or how much they are actually been together as far as the techniques are concerned in the different methods are actually been transferred. So probes. So level probes are actually been most important part of the entire process. We are going to talk about the identity of this particular molecule. So this process essentially DNA molecules which is about 20 to 25 nucleotides long, and it's actually complementary to the sequence of our interest. Suppose if your sequence of interest which we are integrating is actually beta globin gene, you are going to design a probe which is complementary to that of the beta globin and then level it with P32 and is going to send us, and we are going to look into it and we are going to see from this p32 signals exactly how when the probe actually hybridizes to the DNA molecules, because going to once it goes and hybridizes to the DNA molecules, that particular region the probe is going to glow, and from that probe's glow we can actually know that it has actually hybridized to one of the target molecules, and therefore that tells a whole lot of information about the target molecules just by looking into the probes. And something, this is what I was actually talking a little before. So this is the hybridizations, which is actually complementary base pairing between two single stranded DNA molecules. One is the probe, which is single stranded DNA labeled with p32, and this is the DNA molecules which is already been hybridized and which is already been denatured and actually separated into two individual strands. So now they had a sticky ends and they can easily go and bind with it, and this is what is referred as the hybridizations between the molecules and the target molecules and the probes. So applications, now coming back to the southern blot. So these days southern blot is slowly losing its importance because there are different techniques which can supplement the southern blots. So we really are not that much obsessed about using southern blots, and most important is that it's the cumbersome long techniques, and most of the time if you are doing a DNA, it is actually recommended that you use p32, and then p32 is a radio level beta emitter, so there is always an environmental footprints of that radioactivity, and in order to avoid that, majority of the labs at least in India has actually stopped or discontinued using this p32 leveling thing and radioactivity, and now there is a non-radioactive variance of the way by which the probes can actually be leveled and can actually be allowed to hybridize to the DNA. But nevertheless, we are not been bothered too much about it because that's the kind of practical applicability of it when you are going to do that exchange in the real life. But just remember that these are the different ways by the probes that will helps to identify the DNA. Now, southern blots are also used in gene discovery, in mapping, evolution, and the developmental studies, diagnostics, as well as in the forensics. So, any piece of the DNA can be identified even the forensic with the help of these particular techniques. The identification of the transferred genes into the transcripts in the individual genes. The detection of the mutations. So, the presence of the mutation is actually single base pair changes, which is also known as either an insertion or deletion, and you call as an indel, that actually affects a particular genome, and then as a result of which many things actually happens which can actually be resolved with the help of the southern blot. Now, suppose there is a mutation in one of the amino acids, and as a result of this mutation, that particular nucleotide which is mutated actually gets altered into something. Suppose A gets altered into T, or C gets altered into G, or T gets altered into A, whatever is this. And as a result of this particular change in the DNA sequence, the restriction enzymes that actually used to recognize the particular DNA is going not to recognize it, and therefore if there is a mutation, the very strong indication is that if the ELISA that was working previously is not working now because of the reason that there is a mutations, and as a result of these mutations the restriction site has been actually altered, and therefore the DNA fragment that is actually produced out of the different sizes and different length, and that actually gives the first indication that there is an alterations in the DNA sequence. So, just by looking into the pattern of the digested fragments and then hybridizing it and then figuring out where they are actually been produced, you can actually easily find out if there is a novel mutation that has actually appeared in that particular individual, because as a result of that mutation the restriction sequences or the restriction sites got camouflaged or removed, and therefore no longer there have been actually restriction enzymes can be digested, and that actually leads to fragments of a different size and abnormal fragments, but not in the control samples or the healthy samples where you get perfectly normal fragments. So, this is again the workflow. We are not going to too much detail into it because we already described into much detail in the previous slides. This is just a cartoon that actually represents the right from the individual, how you get the tissue cells out, how you crush it, how you get the DNA out of it, how you are going to take the DNA, digest it with the restriction enzymes, how you are going to denature it, how you are going to make them into single stranded, how you are going to run the electrophoresis. After electrophoresis, how you are actually going to transfer them into a membrane, how you are going to hybridize them with a complementary probe against that particular region. That is very important. The complementary probe has to be against a region of your interest. Suppose you are trying to find out what is the mutation in beta globin gene, you are going to use the probes region targeted to that beta globin gene, not to any other regions, because then you are not going to detect it, because only when the probe hybridizes, then only that particular region gets illuminated, because the p32 level is there with the probe, and then we can actually visualize it. So, the applications of the southern blot in the diagnosis of the mutations in beta globin genes. So, in the beta globin genes, one of the very common mutations in the sickle cell disease is the conversion or alterations of the glutamic acid residue into valine, and as a result of this what happens is that there is an alterations or change in one of the restriction enzyme sites because of these particular mutations. A gets converted into T, and as a result of this there is a mutation, and the restriction enzyme site is actually been altered, and this in turn actually leads to a different fragment pattern in the case of sickle cell disease or person with the sickle cell hemoglobin as compared to that of the normal individuals, because the normal individual will have that particular restriction site intact and you are going to visualize them very easily, we are going to separate them out. But if the individual is actually suffering from suppose sickle cell disease, then that particular site has mutated and the restriction site recognition is actually been gone. So, now the restriction enzymes cannot cut it and cannot cleave it, and therefore, now the fragment will have the different size. So, just looking into the fragment size, we can actually fairly conclude that okay, there is a certain alterations in the DNA, and as a result of which we are actually not able to get the fragment what you are going to see from a normal individual. So, that is the first red flag, there is some mutation, some alterations which are actually taking place in the sequence of the DNA. So, again we are going to skip it. So, this is again pretty much the different fragments which is actually been size selected, and you could see that the fragments are of the different sizes, with the heavier fragments moving slower and the lighter fragments moving faster. So, pretty much that is with the southern blots. So, we are done with the southern blots. Now, you are going to move with ahead with the northern blots. The northern blot is routinely being used in molecular biology for detection of specific RNA molecules or RNA sequences in RNA samples, and the method was first discovered in 1997 as well as 1979 by Alvin et al., and then they actually reasoned that if DNA can be detected, why not RNA, and that is how the northern blot came, because it is to do with RNA. And it's still been improved continuously about the different ways how to make it even more sophistication. So, even though it has been actually discovered back in 1945s or 1977s, but still even today people are actually working very hard to try to improve and improvise on how these blots can actually be done within a much more error free way, how the blot can be done in a more better way, so that we have a better resolution of the entire thing. So, the basic steps of northern blot is isolations of this intact RNA or mRNA, whatever the fraction we are actually interested in. Now, separation of the RNA according to the sizes. Now, that is very important, because you do a gel electrophoresis and then get resolved according to the different sizes. Transfer the RNA to a solid support, which is a nitrocellulose or a PBDF membrane, and then fixation of this RNA to the old support, because that is very important. You are going to fix it, you are going to make that RNA molecule stick to that particular surface permanently, and then hybridization of this immobilized RNA to that of the probes complementary to that particular gene of interest. So, if the particular gene of interest has a particular sequence, you are going to use a probe which is opposite that of the sequence of it, and then we are going to detect it. Once we actually have all this process in place, we can actually detect it with the help of a detection reagents like HRP or something like that. So, this is the basic pattern which I was actually talking and telling you a little before, and kind of this is the common things, like you have a gel, and on the top of the gel we give those membranes, those solid matrices, because the whole purpose is that take out the molecules out of the gel, because the gel is not a very stable stuff, right? You are going to degrade, you're going to tear off. So, you are going to transfer them into a matrix, solid matrix, and the solid matrix is actually a PVDF or a nitrocellulose membrane, and then we are going to put as a cushions the different layers of blotting papers. Now, these are more practical things, it is not that important in theory, but just remember that this is the basic way you actually do it when you actually do it into the lab, and then you put the filter papers which acts as a cushion. They also act as a reservoir for the buffers, but the entire process has to be electrically driven, because nowadays we do not do it with the help of weight and all these kind of things. It's not that good, and there is also a chance that there is a lot of non-specific diffusions if you are actually doing it with the help of putting in heavy weight. So, we mostly do it in electron transfer, where we take an electricity and electrical potential difference and with the help of this high potential difference we move out the molecules out of the gel to that PVDF or the nitrocellulose membrane, and then take them to that matrix, and then once that has been done, so now every information what was there in that gel, in the electrophoresis gel, is now been captured within that solid matrix of PVDF or nitrocellulose. And after that you have this blot, you can actually do anything, you can probe it with the help of specific probes. If it is a western blot, you can add antibody to that. So, that is the basic architecture of the entire process. But just remember that this cartoon which actually shows weight, or the previous cartoon that also showed you that putting heavy weights, are something which is people used to do earlier, but now we do not do it. We have a much better techniques of electrotransfer, where we actually use an electrical potential difference to move the molecules out of the gel into these membranes. So, the applications of this is to study the expression of the gene in eukaryotic things, because northern blot has to do with the RNA, and the RNA has to do with the transcriptions, and transcription has to do with the gene expression, right. So, that is the correlationship. So, to study the gene expression in eukaryotic cells, to measure the amount and the size of the RNA which has been transcribed from the eukaryotic genes to estimate the abundance of the RNA, and therefore it is critically important to equalize the amount of the RNA loading which has been going on into the gel. And that is also very true for DNA or for proteins, that what you call as the loading constant or the housekeeping controls. We are going to see that more predominantly into the proteins, but this is also very important in northern as well as the southern blot, where you are going to make sure that this variations is not because of this variation in the loading, but because of these actual biological variations. Okay, so the examples of methods to give equal amount of RNA which has been loading into the gel is, first of all, you are going to load them with a housekeeping gene. Number two is that we are going to visualize them and then actually see the band intensities. And number third is that you are going to make sure that you measure the absorbance of these different molecules, and you are going to exactly follow these concentrations and load them equally. So that is also very important. Don't make a mistake in the calculations, because that is going to be disastrous if that is the whole experiment which you are supposed to do. So now we are coming to the third technique, and then remember these are the three main techniques, and after that there are little hybrids of the different techniques which again I had already mentioned. We are going to see the last one of this technique, which is known as Western blotting, also commonly known as the immunoblotting. Now the whole purpose of the Western blotting is to deal with the protein. So the southern blot is to deal with the DNA, the northern blot has to deal with the RNA expression studies, southern blot mutational and changes in the DNA because it is to do with the DNA, and now we have the Western blot which is actually to do with the proteins which is actually produced within the cells. So the whole thing of the Western blot is that you take the cell, lyse it, take the nucleic acids, supernatant solutions, whatever you want it, estimate the protein, load equal amount of the protein, transfer it into the gel. Let gel electrophoresis to take place so that the mixture of the protein gets dissolved according to the different sizes, and then transfer it to the PVDF or nitrocellulose membrane, and then probe it with the help of an antibody. Similarly, like in the case of probes in southern and northern blot, now you are not going to use probes, you are going to use what you call as an antibody, also known as primary antibody. And the primary antibody is going to be very specific for its target and is going to bind with that, and once it goes and binds with that, we are actually going to get a blot or a band within a particular gel, and that actually tells us that whether the particular antigen or the particular target is actually present within the cell. So Western blot definition is the transfer of the separated proteins into the gel matrix and the membranes, for example nitrocellulose membranes, using vacuum transfer, electrical transfers. Taubin back in 1979 said the electrophoresis transfer of the proteins from polyacrylamide gels to nitrocellulose sheets, and the procedure of that one, he talked a very detail about of this one into PNAS, which is actually again a way back, a very back article, and everyone nowadays are actually been aware of all the development in this particular areas. So the applications and advantages. So the applications of the Western blot is to find out the molecular weight of the protein, to identify a protein, to ID a protein, to know what the protein has actually been doing, to find out the protein interactions and so forth. There are numerous applications. Just by altering the basic skeleton of this process, you can use Western blot even to do a native page where you don't need the proteins. All you need, or where you don't actually take the protein samples and then actually denature them, but we actually been doing them in the native conformations. Now this is a very sensitive technique, and with the help of the Western blot, as little as 15 to 20 nanograms of an average size proteins can easily be detected. So the main Western blotting techniques is that blotting is the blocking steps, then probing them with specific antibodies, washing and detections. Now remember, when you do an Western blot, you already before that we do an electrophoresis which is known as an SDS page. So it's an SDS page followed by an Western blotting. Now SDS actually stands for sodium dodecyl sulfate. It's an detergent which when given to the protein has a capacity to bind to the protein almost like 1.5 grams equally, and therefore the variations in the charges of the proteins, because every protein is composed of proteins with the different compositions of amino acids, so the charges are different. Now if you use a normalizer which is going to camouflage all the charge of the proteins, now the entire protein doesn't have junctional or doesn't have fractional charges, but one common negative charge, and then with that negative charge on the entire protein, we are going to separate them only now in the terms of its molecular weight, because the charges are all the same in the different protein molecules. So all that is different is actually the molecular weight. Now once the molecular weight of the proteins actually been same, once we do that one, then the proteins actually get separated according to their molecular masses, and now if you are using an antibody, is going to bind to the protein of its own molecular mass. Say 50 kD protein is going to be bound by an antibody if it recognizes a 50 kD bands very specifically, and then we are going to see this one. So, and there are different ways to do that one. There is something called extreme-mediated detections, there is an chemiluminescent detections, all of the different fancy ways of detecting the proteins. But here whatever is described is a little backdated, because they actually used in phosphorus P32 against detections. But these days we do not have to use P32, we can use so many different ways just to detect that hybridations between antigen and antibody. So, this is the chamber of electrophoresis. Again, we are going to skip very fast. So, you could see over there that this entire chamber is actually submerged into buffer. So, as the buffer is also been within the chambers, and then there is a cassette that actually sits within that chamber, and within that cassette you have the arrangement of the gel and the nitrocellulose membrane filter papers, and then we are going to tie them everything together, put it into the cassette, put it in the particular structures, and then actually do an pass electricity, so that actually molecules or essentially proteins actually moves out of the gel matrix and actually gets converted or impregnated onto the solid surface of the matrix. And that is very important, because you do not want the protein to be staying in its native conformation ever. That is not good for the protein. Okay, so this is the detection of the transfer which I was talking about. So, this is the nitrocellulose membrane, and then you are actually probing them with the specific antibodies, and you could see that the different bands actually represents that the different things that has been detected. Sometimes if we use a specific antibody, one of the most important challenge of Western blot is actually finding out an antibody which is going to bind very specifically to your target or to your gene of interest. Many times how much specific you do it, how much good quality antibody you have, still you may have multiple bands. Remember, multiple band does not mean that this is non-specific binding. Of course, it does mean that there is non-specificity that is going on, because ideally if you have been using one antibody designed against one target, you should get one particular band. Why you see multiple bands? It may be technical error that this blocking is not good. It may be a technical error that you have loaded too much of protein, so the protein is spilling everywhere. So, those proteins which should not be visualized is now been visualizing. Another problem which could be is that once we have the proteins, then there are different what you call as an isoforms of the protein. So, the same protein actually has multiple RNAs that actually coded for the proteins, and each of these RNAs can be translated, and they have been translated and producing proteins of different molecular sizes. We call as an isoforms of these particular proteins, and then all of these isoforms will actually share that particular recognition motif for that particular transfer of the basis, and then actually that is a very efficient way of doing that one. So, the factors affecting the transfer efficiency, the composition of the gel, whether there is incomplete contact of the gel with the membrane, the position of the electrodes, the transfer time, the size and the compositions of the proteins, the field strength, and the presence of the detergents. So, Western blot briefly is something like this, which is pretty much common in the different techniques, and you could see in the third slide we are giving. So, the primary antibodies. So, once we have actually incubated the primary antibody, the next thing we are going to do is that we are going to recognize this primary antibody with the help of a secondary antibody, and majority of the time this secondary antibody is actually been labeled with either an enzyme which is known as horseradish peroxidase or HRP. That is the most commonly used enzyme, and that enzyme is going to be added with the substrate. The substrate is going to convert this is going to be added by an enzyme, and you are going to give the substrate of the enzyme, and the substrate actually gets converted into a product, and once it forms products, it actually shows an illumination or chemiluminescence, and that can actually be captured and then photographed, and then you can see beautiful bands onto the gel. So, the direct methods, so there is certain advantages and disadvantages. This I will actually recommend to go through these slides very carefully about the different ways. Now, as I was talking about this, advantages is that it is a quick method, because only one antibody is actually been needed. So, this direct and indirect method is that sometimes you do not want to have a secondary antibody systems, you just have to have one primary antibodies, and then conjugate that primary antibody with a particular detection, say an HRP, and then just detect it, and that is known as the direct method. And there is an indirect method where you have the primary antibodies, then you have the secondary antibodies, and then you are actually detecting it, because the secondary antibody is actually intact to the enzyme. So, what is the difference between these two? The primary, the advantages and disadvantages is that if you are doing a direct method, it is much more faster, because you do not need the incubation for the secondary antibody, but at the same time there is a disadvantage is that every primary antibody has to be actually labeled with a particular enzyme like HRP or something like that. Now, let us look into the advantages of the secondary methods. Secondary methods, you have a primary antibody and then you have a secondary antibody. Now, we do not have to label individual of the primary antibodies, just by labeling a couple of secondary antibodies, anti-rabbit, anti-mouse or anti-goat, whatever it is, you can actually interrogate whole lot of the primary antibodies. So, just with a handful of secondary antibodies, you can find out almost, or you can actually interrogate all the primary antibodies. So, you do not have to individually label those primary antibodies, but just with a handful of secondary antibodies, all the primary antibodies can actually be detected. And number two, advantages of the secondary methods or the indirect methods is that you have an amplifications, because you have the primary, you have the secondary, so there can be bridging reactions, and that can actually amplify the signals. This is the illustrations of this Western blot. You could see that we are actually loading the different proteins into the gel, and those are the profiles of the different bands. So this is the electrophoresis stage, the first step, and this is the second step, whether there is an electrotransfer of these proteins from the gels into the nitrocellulose or the PVDF membrane. Again, this is an electrotransfer, so we are applying electric potential to do that one. And this is the third step. So once it is actually transferred, in order to do so that we get a clean blot, what you do is a blocking steps. In the blocking steps, what you do is that we kind of remove all the non-specific places where the proteins could bind, primary antibodies could bind, and can actually produce a bad signal. So you need to block all the additional excess spaces, and this is actually done with the help of by incubating mostly with 5% non-fat milk, which is going to block the non-specific regions, so that only the specific regions gets highlighted. So blocking of the blot. So several measures should be taken in order to decrease the non-specific reactions and to increase the signal to noise ratio. And I was just talking about the blocking step is one of the very crucial steps. We could block it either with BSA or either with the non-fat milk. And this is the steps where this is an antigen, primary antibody, secondary antibody. I was talking about the secondary antibody is conjugated with horse radish peroxidase, or HRP, and that is the one when you add substrate to that is going to produce a reaction, is going to give you a colored product. Depending upon the reaction, if it is in chemiluminescent reactions, you are going to get a signal of the light, and that light can actually expose a photographic film, and you can actually get a band out of it. Now the primary antibody leveling can actually be done. So these days we actually get the level antibody. So this is something which already company do for us. So we are not bothered too much about it. So again we are going to move. So the third final step of this is that once you do everything, you add the substrate, then you actually expose a photographic film, and the light that actually comes out as a result of this chemiluminescent reactions actually gives an exposure to the film, and then wherever there is a signal from whatever the bands, we are going to get those rectangular bands onto this on the nitrocellulose on the photographic film. That actually tells the localization of the bands into the particular gel. Now the detection and the interpretations. Now a pre-strain molecular marker is actually been loaded, and then once you load the gel, the molecular marker is very important because that actually is going to tell you the molecular weight of it. As I mentioned, sometimes you get an additional band, so don't get scared for that, because there could be a different isoforms of this particular proteins, and the antibody may be common, which is recognizing both of these two isoforms. So you might get an additional band. So there's nothing to scare of it, but at the same time, if you see additional band, always assume that there is some non-specificity going on and try to troubleshoot it and address the problem right at this head to find out why you are getting an additional bands. And always remember, sometimes the protein doesn't migrate exactly as per the molecular weight because of the reason that it can be added with the different agents like the sugars and other things, which is known as post-translational modifications. And once they actually will get added with those particular things, the molecular weight of the proteins can be either increase or decrease. So and as a result of the charge is also been altered, and as a result of this entire process, the actual molecular weight of the protein may not be reflected because of this different kind of PTMs or the post translation modifications. Just be aware of that the real molecular weight may not match to the actual molecular weight of the proteins, and because of this reason that there could be different things that is actually been going on. So Western application of the Western blot is mostly in the medical diagnostic for detecting an HIV infections during HIV, viremia. So we can have an antibody against an HIV antigen protein and can actually detect if an individual has an HIV or not. Just take the serum of that particular individual and then use an gel electrophoresis, separate it, transfer it to a membrane, and then probe it with an anti-HIV antibodies. And then so for the different hepatitis viruses or for the herpes, so any kind of an infectious reagents for the diagnostic tool, this is one of the very confirmatory and very gold standard methods to actually identify the different proteins. And the comparisons between northern and southern blots, as you know that they are very different. So we are not going to compare them. One is for DNA, another is for that of the RNA for the proteins. So they are actually very different. The applications are different. And then very quickly we are going to talk about another technique which is known as the far western blots. Far western blot is a way in which we are going to study the protein-protein interactions. So we have done with the western blots, and the far western blot is that if the two proteins are interacting with each other, there are different ways to do that one, like immunoprecipitations and others. But this is another technique which is a little deviation of the western blot to detect the two proteins which are actually interacting with each other. And then this is the southwestern blot, as I was talking about before, that this is a way to find out the DNA binding proteins, where we are doing a combination of the southern blot as well as the western blot and find out the proteins that actually binds to the DNA. And then the summary of this entire thing, this is the most important slide, which you are going to see that the different kinds of the blots, the northern blot, the southern blot, the western blots, the southwestern blot, the northwestern blots, and the far western blots. So if you use a combination of all of these blots, you are going to integrate a large number of different variables within the cells. You are going to talk a going to delineate a large number of informations about what is the nature of the DNA, what is the RNA transcript that comes out, what kind of proteins are there, and what is the function of this one. And all of these informations you can actually use by combination of the southern, western, northern, southwestern, northwestern, as well as the far western blots. So I am pretty sure that you have actually understood all of these techniques so far. And just to summarize, the blotting techniques is an essential way by which you actually interrogate DNA, RNA of the proteins, and you can actually know a whole lot about their informations. Southern blot is for DNA, northern blot is for the RNA, and the western blot is for the proteins. Each one is different, and depending on what kind of questions they are actually been asking. But together they are actually fantastic techniques which can actually answer so much different things about the biology of the cells and what exactly the things that is actually happening. They have an extremely large applications in biomedical sciences, in investigations, in research, and so forth. So I am sure that you have enjoyed this particular tutorial. Feel free to go back and actually read all of these different references which actually talks a whole lot in more detail about this entire techniques. But again, these are all wet lab techniques, so you need to do by hands to get a mastery of this particular techniques. So thank you and have a nice day.